I'm Ronnie Eldridge. Welcome to Eldridge and Company. My friend Linda Peng is a remarkable woman with a life story that started in Taiwan and continues today in New York. She's a feminist and activist with endless energy and commitment. You are so busy. You're a practicing attorney. You're an executive committee member of the Friends of CUNY. You're on the board of the Feminist Press, and you host a television program, Asian New York?
Asian America.
Asian America.
From time to time.
On WNYC.
E.
So how do you do all this, and what got you to do all this?
I'm not sure. It's
Yeah.
just, I don't know. When you reach a certain age, you meet enough people that they say, well, why don't you do this, why don't you do that?
Yeah.
But I think
You were born in Taiwan.
it's curiosity.
And you came here when you're 10 years old?
I came over when I was 10, yeah.
And that's always fascinating me because I look at all the people who come here from foreign countries and different cultures and everything and just have the greatest respect for them because I don't think I could master that. Was it hard?
You know, when I was 10 years old, I was just curious. I think that
Curiosity is your whole thing?
The strain in my life is certain curiosity. But when I first came here, I thought everything was so big.
Yeah.
Big cars, big roads, big houses, and big people, I must say. And that was fascinating to me. And of course, after I learned a new language, and by the time I'd say about 14, 15, I began to think in English. And
that was an important turning point, I think.
I think it makes,
Yeah.
you know, when one changes one's language in one's mind, it also changes one's perception and also a way of looking at things. And I think that might have been something where, you don't lose anything and you still have something from the past, the heritage and all that, understanding who we are, Taiwanese and all that. My family's Hakka. Which
means what?
Hakka is a certain minority from, well, it's Han, Chinese, but they came from north of China, actually in the Yellow River Basin. And somehow throughout the dynastic turmoil, they somehow ended up in Taiwan in the 1600s, which where my ancestors ended up. And then some of the other ones went to Southeast Asia. And in the 1800s, a lot of them also went to build railroads in California.
Oh.
Yeah, so the Hakkas are sturdy people, peasant stock. And the interesting thing is that the women never bound their feet like the other Chinese women before.
That's very interesting.
And they were known to be quite fierce because they had to till the land along with the men, you see.
So that gives you so you were born with a whole
It's in the genes, maybe, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know, but I think when you ask a question about all these things, I think the common factor is probably curiosity. It's just how things work, how people are, why are they the way they are. You know, I think about those type of stuff.
But you're the way you are. I mean, when you say you get assimilated, but you never do lose that cultural heritage, do you?
I don't think so.
But it's interesting because when you say you suddenly think in English, how many of today's immigrant groups...
Let me give you an example.
Yeah.
I was in China recently, and I just happened to be at the Great Wall by myself, visiting. I had a car and everything. And so I stopped by this lady stand with water. I wanted to get some water, and I spoke in Chinese, and she looked at me very curiously. She said, "You're not from our country, are you?" I said, "Why do you ask?" And this is all in Chinese now, in Mandarin Chinese. And she says, "Oh, well, you're not really from this country, are you?" And I said, "Well, my ancestors probably came from here." She says, "Oh yeah, I can see your ancestors, but you're really not from this country, are you?" Then I finally had to say, "Well, I'm from New York, United States." She said, "Oh, that's what it is." So my point is that
it's the way
the culturation is such that perhaps even the way I walk, the way I carry myself, the way I even engage in conversation with people in China or Taiwan, they detect a slight difference. Because of all the years I've been in this country, being educated here, there's a certain openness, certain unpretentious curiosity, which you try to control in other cultures, because you're not supposed to be too forward in your questions. You're not supposed to look people in the eye, let's say, because that's quite rude. So it's these little things that are quite subtle, but it's also quite differentiating between cultures.
It's so interesting because I think of Asian women that I've met and that are here working and everything. I guess the fact that they're here means they're already a little different. I mean, they seem to be quite assertive.
Yes, yes, and I, you know, when we use the language, the word Asia or Asian, it's so broad.
Yeah, of course.
Geographically, it's just so different.
Enormous
Yeah,
area.
you're talking about East Asia, Southeast Asia, South Asia. So when we talk about East Asia, it's mainly Korea, China, Japan, Taiwan, you know, Singapore and all that. Singapore is actually Southeast Asia, and then you have South Asia, the entire continent, the Pakistani, you know, influence,
Right,
and then
so
the
it's so
India,
different.
South Indian, you know. But so I think a lot is I think it's product of the changing
World.
times,
Huh?
especially Asia. Like China is
Yeah.
a burgeoning power, India is a burgeoning power, and there's tension going on. And I think it's got to have effect on how women are, how people are, you know, how they look at the world, because there's greater confidence now, especially the Indian and the Chinese. It's got to reflect in the women how confident they feel as far as how to handle life, how to deal with kids, how to deal with jobs, all sorts of things. And
So you came here when you were 10 years old. You went to school.
yes.
Where were you in
You know,
Washington?
we landed first in Seattle, Washington.
Yeah.
My father had a fellowship, and then somehow he got funding from the various foundations. So he had projects in.
He was a doctor.
Yes, he was a doctor, and then he got his, I think, PhD in some public health or something like that. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
And then he had projects. Interestingly, his project was in maternal child health, and his project entailed training midwives to be educators of contraception and birth control, because midwives are of a certain prestige in a village, in a country, right? And so my father's project was to use them as carriers to educate women about the rhythm method. And
Where is this, in Asia?
This is in Malaysia. This was in
Malaysia.
Thailand. And his
that's
project
very
spread to Bangladesh and in even parts of Pakistan and all that.
Oh.
And that is to educate women about.
So you traveled then with him?
Yeah, I did.
Oh, that's so
yeah.
great.
So when I was growing up.
Yeah.
So.
So you
I
lived
think
a
that's
lot
all-
of different places, and
Yes,
you
I
have
have.
so you have a broad range of everything. All right, then you came here. You went to college.
I went to college at the University of Michigan. After all these traveling, I decided I don't want to come back. At least stay put for a few years to study at the university, and then after I graduated, I went to the steel mills of Indiana.
Yeah. Now, why did you become a steel worker?
Well, you know, this was in
You were on an assembly line,
I was
No.
in an apprenticeship program. I'm a certified millwright.
which means what?
Which means I used to fix machines, huge machines. I worked in what they call the largest plate mill in the world, and that particular mill rolled heavy plates for tanks, for submarine, and for trucks. No, actually tanks, big tanks. Trucks are a little thinner, but big ones. And so we repair the machinery which roll the plates. So it includes gears, the rolling and the shearing mechanism and all that. So I think I had help because I was very much a tomboy. So I had no problem climbing and going to all those places, slinging sledgehammers and all that.
But how did you get there from the University of Michigan to there?
You know, it's
Where were you?
curiosity again.
Gary, Indiana? Is
Gary,
that-
yeah, curiosity again, because, you know, at that time in college, people were talking about the blue collar this, blue collar that, and all that. I said, well, let me find out for myself what it's all about. So I did. And apparently, through a friend who said that, you know, they're hiring in Gary, Indiana, and especially women, because they get government contract, they have to have some kind of diversity in the hiring.
And you're two.
So I got hired, and they didn't think I was going to last, and I did last 4.5 years. The only reason I left was because I was laid off, and
So then you were laid off, and
then moved to New York at that time because, situation occurred where it allowed me to come to New York, and my son was born in New York, Brooklyn, in fact.
in Brooklyn. And then you went to law school.
I went to law school, later. Again, I don't know, it's one of those things where, you know, I better straighten out. I sort of zigzagged in my early life. I better settle down and do something so I could support myself.
Yeah. And your son.
And my son, yeah. And I had fun, and I think it was in that process that I met you.
Right, where we
Right.
met when the first time I ran for office, or the
Yes,
second
yes,
time, I
yes.
guess,
We
when I ran
camp-
for the city council.
Yes, and we campaigned together.
You were a
and
great campaigner. So how did we meet?
I think it was through mutual friends. In fact, it might have been Yolanda Sanchez, was it?
Maybe,
Yeah.
yes.
So
All right.
anyway.
So
but-
now, it seems to me your interest today is in the Feminist Press. Is that true?
I'm interested in Feminist Press only because, well,
Not
I
only.
not only.
Mainly.
You're right. Well, actually, in large part, I just respect the women who've been involved. This is the 35th year of the Feminist Press. In fact, we're planning a big gala in October. But when I listen to their stories,
What is the Feminist Press? Let's talk about
Feminist
that.
Press, you know how it got started was Florence Howell. She was a professor at Goucher College and everything. And
Goucher's in Baltimore.
yes,
Yeah.
yes, in Baltimore. And apparently she came across this writing by a woman named Rebecca Harding Davis, who published a piece in the Atlantic Monthly back in 1861. And she published it anonymously. And after the publication, it just disappeared. So somehow Florence found it. She said, that's a fascinating story because this story started out with a group of white women and black women in 1861 at the outset of the Civil War. They came out of this iron mill and they went to the bar together to hang out. And the name of the book is called Life in the Iron Mills. It was published in 1972 by the Feminist Press, which is the only press that would publish it. And so I think through that process,
Did she founded the
she
Feminist
was one of the
Press?
main founders of the Feminist Press, and the whole point of this thing is to unearth the buried voices of women, you know. And I found that terribly, terribly important because there's a quotation by Napoleon that says something about history is by those who tell it.
It's true.
Yeah, so, well, you know, who's going to tell the history of these
Right.
women who somehow are in the dustbin? Somebody has to uncover them and unearth them somehow. And this is one of the instruments of that, which is the Feminist Press. And I thought this whole notion of trying to recover stuff is quite worthy of treasure, I think.
So what are some of the stories that they
Well,
have
you know,
uncovered?
it's several stuff. One of the things is Women Writing Africa, which is a major project. It's funded by Rockefeller and Ford Foundation. And it's in its second volume. And it's basically different regions of women telling their stories, and people write it down, or authors. And then it's translated from the various African dialects into English through French in some of the colonial.
So interesting. So they are insights into what life is like in.
Yeah, and people discovered that Africa is so diverse.
It's
You know,
like
not only
Asia.
not only the various African tribes and everything, but there are Asians there, and then the leftovers from the colonial period and all that, and they have various voices. And there's such difference between North Africa, which is Islamic Africa, the parts of that, and they're writing that stuff, that volume now. And then, of course, Southern, Central, it's a big continent, Africa. And there's got to be voices of women, and I think that's part of the big project. Baghdad Burning is the latest one published by the press, and it is a story. It's basically a series of blogs by a woman, a girl blogger in Baghdad. She's underground in Baghdad.
The
She came in-
blogs are the journals that are kept on the internet.
Yes.
Right.
And her blog name is Riverbend. And somehow this is the way that she felt she could deal with all the destruction and death and basically a destruction of a culture and a city. This is the way she could deal with it, by blogging, and hopefully that people would read it. And the press published all her blogs, and it's really catching on. It's really catching on.
Yeah.
So it's these little examples that I think I've
what
won
does
over.
It do? It reveals what life is like there now.
Yeah, the changes.
The changes.
She's well-educated, English-speaking, family come from a well-to-do background, and the blog responses, actually, she said in the responses of some of the bloggers is that, how can an Iraqi woman be so good in English? and so she has to explain the stuff, and that and she tells them that we're actually quite versed in, we don't hate Americans. We know Britney Spears, we know about this, we know about that, we know about Brad Pitt, we know about this. But she's appalled that the Americans don't know as much about
These
the
things.
Iraqis. Yeah. And that, and she wished that there's more communication. And part of my optimism, despite everything else that's happening in the world, is technology that allow people to communicate with each other.
Yeah.
And that's a very positive thing because as long as people
if they have the
dare
access
to do that.
it. Yeah, it's so wonderful.
Yeah.
And then you've got a novel by Elizabeth Janeway.
Oh,
who
you knew her?
Yeah, I knew her. She was great. She was a terrific thing. And then this is...
this is about women without men. It's by an Iranian woman. I think her life is in danger because she wrote this book, which is quite revealing about women's experience and all that. And it's terribly immodest, terribly immodest. You know, it's actually quite frank discussion how Iranian women feel about men, about themselves, about their lives, and this and that. And
so the Feminist Press publishes these books. They're sold in bookstores.
yes, they're sold in bookstores, and they're used in women's study programs around the colleges and universities in this country and around the world, actually. And then also, for example, it's for libraries, for even high school.
Oh.
These are a series of famous women.
This is the woman in Burma who won the
Nobel
Prize.
Yes.
And she's been held prisoner, wasn't she?
Yes, she has.
That's
So it's from high school, college level, and also, I think part of the thing is not only to unearth the hidden voices of women or buried voices of women, but it's also to encourage the public discourse that it would have broader and enriched voice of women's voices and perspective in the public discourse, and also in the literary canons. We're talking about highfalutin literary, series and stuff. You know, maybe Alan Bloom, whoever, Harold Bloom, it is. You know, would have something where it would have women's publication type thing where
we'd be on an equal par. It wouldn't be that it's hidden or
it's not necessarily separate, but it's just that women are very much part of humanity, you know, and there's got to be something that's very solid and very rich there. And I think if given a chance, I think people will really appreciate history a lot more, literature a lot more. Public discourse might be even deeper, you know.
We met through politics, and I know you were interested in this last presidential election, and you wrote a statement to your friends, right? So what do you find about politics today and the government and the world?
I'm a little concerned. I mean, I listened to the results and everything of 2004 and listening to what the press said about what people said, and that is that this whole notion of people voted for moral values. And that was quite curious to me because I don't understand what they mean by moral values. You know, throughout my family, my friends, here in New York and in California, I feel we're very moral people. Right. You know, we respect people. We take care of our kids. We believe that we should give more if we're able to. We should help people. We should respect other people's culture, religion, everything, and we should firmly believe in a separation of church and state. You know, and that religion is a very private thing, and I do believe people have to have faith, but it's a private thing. It really shouldn't even go to the government. You know, then it becomes a whole different story. And I was listening to somebody, and it's very true that this country was founded by people who escaped religious tyranny, and I just can't help as though, you know, I look around in some parts of the country, if we don't go to a certain kind of church,
right, where
you're shunned, or you think that you're not a moral person, right. You know? And I don't understand that. Well, I do understand that, but I don't know.
So do you think the press was overstating it? Are we back to what Napoleon said? What did he say?
Oh, history is what is that?
What?
History is told by people who tell it, something like it. History is by people who tell it.
Right.
History is by people who tell it.
Which means, in a way, that A, you have to speak up, but B, you have to be really careful about who's telling it, because it isn't going to be true. It's their history, it's not everybody's history. So if the press interprets all of this, do you think the press, I mean, you had 5 years in Gary, Indiana as a blue-collar worker. Did you see this kind of thing?
I don't know about the press. I think, I have to say that I feel for the journalists, the correspondents, and people in the press who are honest. And that is that it really requires so much courage on their part to really fulfill their responsibility to have that public trust to tell the truth, whatever the truth, and truth is so stretched and everything, but at least to tell what they see. And it takes so much courage because it's almost going against the tide now to really say, this is what I saw and this is what I think, you know. So I have to say that I think for journalists or people in the press, I think it's really to reach deep down inside them and to really find that courage individually and as a whole, you know.
But so now let's go back to Gary, Indiana.
Yeah.
Were you struck by a great difference in values between University of Michigan or your family and where you had traveled and the people that you met in Gary, Indiana?
You know, I have to say my years at the steel mills were tremendous, enormous learning experience because I really had a feeling of what this country is all about. Because it's in the steel mills that I really understood about ethnicity. Because when you're in the mills, you're not known necessarily by your name and all that. You're known by where you come from, your ethnic identity. You're either Italian, you're either Greek, you're either Yugoslav, you're either Polish, you're either Mexican. And
what did they call you?
They call me a broad, I think. No, actually, they couldn't figure me out because I was a woman and I was Chinese and all that stuff. I don't think they dared to use a disparaging word to me, but they all had these slangs and vernaculars for all the various type of people. But it also speaks to, and also the blacks, of course, you know, who came after World War II to the industrial building after World War II or during World War II. And it's a segregation, but at the same time, it's also integrated situation, you know.
Well, I remember about Gary, Indiana, is that there was a mayor named Hatcher.
Yes. And
he was there in,
Yep,
when was that, 70?
It was in the mid-70s.
68,
all the way
because
to
he was supporting Robert Kennedy. That's how I remember that.
Yes. And he loomed large in that city.
And he was African American.
Yes, he was. Yes. So, so that's a...
Did they mean it when they had terms for each person? Was it a venal kind of thing, or is it just a slang that comes as an identification?
Both.
Both. So was it a discouraging kind of education?
You know, I had to prove myself because they had this thing about, oh, you college grad, you know, what the hell are you doing here kind of thing. But I had to prove that I was willing to get dirty with them and physically dirty. There's a lot of oil and grease and also just plain dirt, black dirt. And that I was willing to help them. You know, I was not a prima donna. I was willing to, say, carry the tools and all that stuff, you know. And I think toward the end, I'm proud to say I won the respect, I must say, because one of the old-timers were telling me, you know, you're going to have your little helpers, and who's going to carry your tools for you, you know. So that, I believe, was a proud moment. I must say that I was accepted.
Yeah.
And to me, knowing where I came from Taiwan and everything, wherever I go in a situation, perception is so important. And so how I relate to them is so important, that they could see me not necessarily just who I am, but beyond that, to be a person whom they can trust, they could get to know, and be, you know, with whom they can become friends. I think that's also a message somehow that, you know, it just takes a little time and a willingness to
and hard work.
Learn about people, that type of thing.
Taiwan is much in the news lately.
Yes, indeed.
And we have 3 minutes left in the program. Can you explain what's happening?
Well, Taiwan was given to Japan in 1895, and for 50 years it was under Japanese occupation as a colony. And then in 1945, Taiwan was so-called taken away from Japan. And of course, at that time, there was a civil war in China between the Kuomintang, Chiang Kai-shek, and the Communist Party under Mao, you know. So the Kuomintang lost, so they escaped to Taiwan. So for a brief period of time, Taiwan was so-called a legitimate China. And then it was not until after Nixon went to China where Taiwan became a little unsure about itself, because China itself became the recognized China. So the situation is here where there's a movement in Taiwan for independence. And it's somewhat supported or not supported by the Bush administration, by Japan. And you have the burgeoning Chinese power who's saying that Taiwan has always been part of us, and it's an internal matter. You should not be involved. But Bush administration is saying, wait a minute, we have a treaty with Taiwan that we will protect it. So that's the source of tension.
Why is
At the
Taiwan
same time,
important
though,
to China?
At the same time, I was just going to say,
Yeah.
Taiwan has so much money invested in China.
I see.
And there's such economic integration where at one point before this whole bunch of this heavy words between across the Taiwan Straits, in fact, there was a direct flight from Taiwan to China, and the two coasts are quite integrated. And I think, this is my personal opinion, I think China made a big mistake in using this anti-secession type of language because it just geared up the independence forces. So I think it created a lot of tension, which I think is unnecessary.
So Taiwan is a economically important unit then for China.
Oh, very, 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 very important.
Is it considered a wealthy?
It's a very, I think even despite the Asian crisis in the 1990s and everything, it has at that time, I believe, 800 billion in reserve or something like that. So it's quite wealthy country, the heavy reserves and
how large is it?
Oh gosh, I wish
Is it about size of?
I think 2 states together.
Two states.
Yeah, I think New Jersey, Connecticut combined together is Taiwan. It's rich in natural resources, and I think it's just that it's a well-educated populace. And it's become actually more service-based and financial center, and it's interesting how we're going to see the tension.
Well, it's been very interesting to talk to you, and we are at the end of our program.
Oh, thank you.
So thank you, Linda, and we'll watch as things go, and we'll look for the Feminist Press.
Yes,
All right.
thank you, Ronnie.
You're welcome.